And we are live. Welcome to Inside Movies Galore. This is episode number 34, and I am here in the room. I have director Paul Bunnell. Welcome, Paul.
Who is Paul? Who is Paul Bunnell? I don't know what Paul Bunnell. Actually, you pronounce my name Paul Bunnell if you want to get it right.
Okay, sure. Paul Bunnell.
Yeah, hey, there you go. That's better.
Paul Bunnell.
How are you?
Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fine. Do I just call you by your name, Dave?
Sure, you can call me. You can call me by my name. That's fine. We'll start with how did you get involved with filmmaking, and where are you from locationally originally?
Well, originally I was involved with the Witness Protection Program, and this was on in a remote part of Russia, and this was a long time ago. Basically, back in Russia, but they had a little thing where they bring people in and put them into this Witness Protection Program. It's very non-communistic. I like that about Russia, at the time. Okay. Now, of course, this was back in the 1940s.
Okay.
Did you want the real answer, or should I just keep going like this?
I want the real answer.
Well, I'm from a little area in California.
Okay.
Called Burbank, California, and
alrighty.
I started making movies when I was a boy, okay. a young person. Back in the day, film cameras instead of video cameras, and that's true, And a roll of film back then was several dollars, and then you'd only get about 3 minutes, three and a half minutes on roll of film, and I would make these short films on Super 8.
Okay.
Back in Burbank, North Hollywood. The local valley, this area in California. So yeah, that's sort of what got me into it, making movies as a kid with my friends, and enjoying that thing. And yeah,
you started actually making films in the 70s, correct?
Well, if you want to date me, and I don't mean in the literal sense, but yes. I did start making movies. Probably the first time I picked up a camera was around 1974.
Nice.
I got this camera. It was a Super 8 silent camera that didn't have batteries. You wound it up in it, a spring motor. So you wound it up on the side, which was really cool. On my 11th birthday, my mom and dad gave me this camera. So I started shooting some test footage. The very first roll of film I ever shot was at Disneyland. I've never said that to anybody before, but that's true.
Okay.
A film camera. And I shot a roll of film, was at Disneyland in 1974, and I still have that roll of film today. I didn't make a movie, topic. I just shot home movie footage.
Okay.
And then I started getting a little more ambitious, and I put together a story and started doing movies with my friends.
Okay.
By the year. And in 1985, I got a sound camera. Probably for my birthday. And back then, I know now this seems like a sound camera. Now, wait a minute. Did you actually have color?
Alrighty. So, why don't
making, and then I did sound making.
Okay.
Progressed. I got better and better, and a little more sophisticated. Okay. And then my film started getting into, film festivals and that sort of thing. And, one thing led to another, and here we are today.
Alrighty. So, why don't I ask you about the first short film that I see listed here? Talk about your short film, The Visitant. How did you get involved?
Yeah, The Visitant. Well, The Visitant was just another one of my movies that I was making at the time, and but the difference is that particular film was the first of my movies to get played on television. It was shown on subscription television
Okay.
as a short film, and it would follow Rocky 3. I remember it was on late one night on subscription television. It was called On,
Okay.
and this thing was the paid TV of the day. You would get enough, and I submitted my short film, The Visitant, and I submitted it to On, and they had no idea that this movie was shot Super 8. They assumed it was professional, and which it was not, but the movie was shot on a very small budget.
Okay.
And it was the first of my films to have original music and all professional actors, and really a fun little short film. And one of my favorites to this day. I mean, because it used to get played all the time. It was in film festivals, the movie theater, teen film festival with the one that J.J. Abrams, these were in this festival. And so I crossed paths with those guys. As a matter of fact, one of the guys I crossed paths with through The Visitant, Scott went on to become half of the team who wrote Ed Wood, The People versus Larry Flint, all kinds of huge movies like that. They did 2 Tim Burton movies. They also did, in addition to Ed Wood, they did Big Eyes.
Okay.
And they recently did this O.J. Simpson thing. So anyway, a lot of young people like J. Abrams and Scott out of this festival.
Okay.
And it was at it was a small theater, put on a small theater in called the New Art, and a few different theaters. And Gerard Vell, he got young filmmakers' movies, and he exhibited them in theaters, and it was really, really cool.
Cool. And
It was one of the star films back of the day in that series,
okay.
And I remember people really, really liking it a lot.
Can you tell us anything about the Visitant? A little bit of a summary, and maybe.
Well, the Visitant is basically like a Twilight Zone episode, and a lot of my early short films were not formatted per se, but they were really in the style of Twilight Zone episodes. They had kind of like these endings, these hook endings. And
Okay.
The Visitant is basically about a guy who goes to starts off with a guy visiting his son's grave.
Okay.
Thing, and so he's standing by his grave, the gravesite.
Okay.
There's a voice calling, and it's a little boy's voice saying, "Daddy, Daddy." And then he turns around, and there's his son standing there, and he's like, well, "Jimmy, how can this be?" And the boy says, "Follow me." So he's chasing his son, his people and person that cannot see him. And then he realizes that he cannot see him because he himself is dead.
Okay.
And his son, and the girl at his gravesite is his daughter. And she's giving a monologue about, "Daddy, Daddy, why did you take the car and get drunk and kill little Jimmy, my only brother, your only son," that kind of thing. So, it was really kind of a fun, cool. And then the whole thing ends cycle where it starts out where it began. I mean, it ends where it began.
Huh.
And it goes in a cycle. It was a cool little movie that I made when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And that movie is available to see.
Okay.
On if you get this DVD that's now out of print. Entertainment put out my movie That Little Monster in the 90s. Actually, a movie I made in the 90s was put out in the early 2000s. One of the bonus features on that DVD is The Visitant.
Okay. And how about we talk about your next short film from 1984, Obliteration?
Well, Obliteration has been in the actual witness protection program for many years now, and it's really a movie that not too many people have seen it. I made the movie with The Visitant because The Visitant is a highly popular short film from a very young person, that I was, and it showed a lot of promise. I mean, if I'm looking at it now in my 50s, thinking about a 17-year-old making this movie, that boy must have been at the age of 17 making this short film. So I tried to outdo myself with a movie that had more special effects. And but the problem was the story didn't quite. It had the Twilight Zone type ending, but the story didn't quite grab people as much as The Visitant. Okay. And not many of my movies have. It's funny. Is sweet. Shorter is sweeter, and it just gets to the point. But the Obliteration, another movie that another short film I did, a little bit longer, a little bit more ambitious. Special effects and great lighting, and it's about a guy that basically is on one big, trip. I mean, it's not LSD per se, but it's a guy who loses drugs, and he starts seeing demons and creatures, and they pull him into this other dimension, and he's trapped, he can't get out. But this was all very skillfully by this character that actually got him out of the way. It was not one of my favorites, but technically a very excellent film. Okay. Considering I was about 19 when I made that film.
Okay. Very cool. How about let's talk about your short film, Final Destination Unknown.
Final Destination. That's another one that was what I like to call The Visitant, Obliteration, and Final Destination Unknown the Hell trilogy.
Okay.
I call them the Hell trilogy because the main character ends up in some kind of hell. It's really quite funny. So I guess what I was doing with Obliteration and Final Destination Unknown was I was trying to recapture the magic of The Visitant. Okay. And in doing so, I was a little more extravagant. The budget was higher. Okay. I was still shooting on Super 8, but I had a really excellent production values for a Super 8 film. Original music score, really good actors, and again, my films were always technically excellent in the sound and the cinematography. I've always had a little problem with my stories. Okay. Even up to The Ghastly Love of Johnny X. I mean, I've always had a little bit of a problem with my stories. Not to say that they're bad, but that my stories are just a little different. Okay. And but anyway, Final Destination Unknown. I mentioned Obliteration. One of my hell films where the character ends up in another dimension in a hell-like setting scenario, and it, along with The Visitant and Obliteration, all three of those films were shown in different venues and film festivals. I know that The Visitant and were both on very early anthology VHS releases in the 80s. Okay. There was a company, originally there was a company called VidCrest, and VidCrest released The Visitant on a VHS anthology that I see on eBay from time to time, and it goes. I tried to bid on it recently on eBay to try to get this tape, and it just went for a lot of money. I was totally outbid. I mean, I'm like, wow. People are buying old VHS tapes. I only wanted it because it has my my monster from The Visitant on the cover of the box. So if you ever see Strange Tales with this monster, this ghouly looking monster on the box, that's a shot from The Visitant. And I was very smart in those days, and I still am, but even as a kid, I had a friend, and this friend took behind the scenes photos of all of my movies on the film set, and then publicity photos. So I had a vast array of images. Of course, in those days, we didn't have digital cameras. Mm-hmm. We had to take everything on 35 millimeter film, get it processed at the lab, and you've got pictures and photographs. But I have photo albums and negatives and stuff from all of my early films. That's so I'm really good about cataloging and promoting myself as a young person, and that was important. I think
I think so too.
That was very important
too, and I think it helped you later, especially in your ghastly love of Johnny X.
I
go ahead.
To this day don't understand how be in film festivals and kind of like be in the likes with the likes of J.J. Abrams and Scott Alexander and even Quentin Tarantino a little bit, sort of similar circles. Yet I'm the one guy that nobody's heard of. I don't get it. It's sort of like I'm not blaming myself, or maybe it's just the way fate is. I always wanted to, as a very young person, be a director, and I always felt that I was destined to be a major director in a film, especially considering I started so young, and that was my sole ambition. And, to this day, it still is. And I don't know if I want to reflect on it honestly and say it's kind of sad, to think that everything I've ever done, I've had to fight tooth and nail to get these movies made. I've never had studio backing or anything like that. But you know what? Doggone it, I haven't given up. And even though I didn't become a Quentin Tarantino or a J.J. Abrams or a Scott Alexander, I mean, all those guys have won Academy Awards, or whatever. But, and they're household names in the film industry. But for me, nobody really knows who I am. I mean, a few people do in a small way. I mean, I've made some cult movies that people know me for, but honestly, I mean, I've always wanted to tell interesting stories, my kinds of stories, and I've always wanted to make movies that were interesting and unique. And to this day, I'm still trying to do that. I've got another one that I've written, and I'm trying to get that one made to try to top Johnny X, and make up for all the mistakes I made in that film. But it's really hard, David. It's you just got to hang in there through life's problems and just do your best, really.
It really is. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it is a struggle, especially since, you have the struggle between the bigger industries and the smaller industries. And they've made it a hell of a fight.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because there's so much content now, and everybody can do it. When I was making movies as a kid, it was really specialized. I mean, you had to be really committed to want to make movies as a kid, as a young person in the 70s and 80s, and even 90s a little bit. You had to really be committed. If you wanted to do it right, you had to shoot it on film. And there was no, you didn't have phones, or these little cameras were not easy to get. I mean, if you got a video camera, they were very expensive and the quality sucked, But back in those days, you had to try to make a home movie format look professional. Or if you were like incredibly rich or had rich relatives, you could go out and get, 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter and make your feature.
Mhm.
A lot of people like Don that did that was able to break through. One guy, a friend of mine, his name is Don Coscarelli.
Okay.
And Don Coscarelli made Phantasm and John Dies at the End and movies like that. Bubba Hotep, I'm sure you've heard of those movies.
Yes, sir.
And he's a good friend of mine. And you know what Don did with Phantasm? His father had some money, I guess, and Don was, gosh, he was, what was he, 19 years old or so when he was very young, and he was able to make a 35 millimeter feature. And I guess his dad knew some people over at Avco and Embassy and the distribution arm, or he was either involved, or I don't know the full story, but anyway, he was able to get his son's film. And Don has an amazingly creative mind, and he's a very talented guy. But he's a little bit older than I am. But he comes from. I come from that same sort of young person's 1970s, trying to figure it out, make a movie when not everybody could make movies.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that we realized that was available to us as it started cropping up in the 80s was VHS. What they were looking for, there were these little mom and pop, they were little labels that were looking for content. And that's how I got some of my short films on anthologies. And, another friend of mine, Mark Pirro, did a movie called Polish Vampire in Burbank. And it was all, have you heard of Mark Pirro?
I think I have.
Mark has kind of a reputation for doing these films. Polish Vampire in Burbank was the first Super 8 feature that got professionally distributed. I guess it got a big release. It was up on it was on television on that Up All Night with Gilbert Gottfried. Remember that show? And
I remember that show.
you do remember that show?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just saying that, in the 80s, we had all of these, avenues that were open for us, and because we had all these films, and not everybody had their movies. So the really good ones were able to get distribution into these smaller VHS things and, cable deals. That's how I got The Visitant on cable TV back in 1982. I was thrilled. I was working at the Walt Disney Studios in the mailroom. And they called me up and they said, "Hey, we'd love to show your movie. We liked it. We're going to lease it, from you for a year. Here's a check for $500." And literally, that's what I got in 1982, $500, which was really the cost of making that movie, that short film. And so they leased it from me, and it got played on television. Nice. And I was thrilled. Of course, that's pennies today, but.
Well, yeah.
But at the time, I was, 18 years old or so when that 18, 19, by the time I got on TV, I was thrilled, really. I was thrilled. So anyway, I know I digress a little bit, but today's markets, it seems like there's all of these, things like Netflix and, Amazon Prime and all of these things. The theatrical markets sort of become exclusive to the studios and their tentpole movies for the most part. I mean, there's tons of other theatrical things, but those are the only things that make the big, big money these days that anybody really talks about because they're making billions of dollars,
Well,
but these small films that we made back in the day, I mean, those were the types of movies, if you were any good, and if you can get your movie shot on 35 millimeter, you had a really good chance at getting distribution. And not only that, but then you had a really good chance of moving up and out and becoming somebody, And I never got into film school. I tried once. I applied for the American Film Institute, AFI. I didn't get in. Okay. And I'd already made a ton of movies, short films, and I was surprised. And they didn't take me,
Let's talk.
But anyway, I guess I'm just, ruminating about all of these past defeats that I've had, all of these things I've done, figuring out how to have a film career, to be a director. when I know so many directors, some of them have become friends, some of them I knew before they became directors.
Mhm.
You know, and why didn't I get it? Well, I didn't get it because I didn't get it, but the path that I took, the movies that I made have reached some people, and they're not great or anything, but I think that I have provided some entertainment to some folks, and I definitely know that my best is yet to come because I haven't done this my entire life only to have nothing come of it. You know, I'm just still out there plugging away.
I hear you on that. In any case, why don't we talk about? And I know that you said that before that some of your films came to anthology. It actually it looks like there was an anthology that was listed on IMDb here called "Terrifying Tales." That's your final
Yeah.
unknown got to.
Right, yeah. Terrifying Tales was another one, and that one did feature Final Destination Unknown. And then
Uh,
there was one other one, and I can't remember what they called it. I know there was Strange Tales. Strange Tales was one, Terrifying Tales, and then there was a third one, and I can't remember what, you know. Because The Visitant was used on two different VHS anthology releases.
okay.
Strange Tales was the one, and then the company that did Terrifying Tales did. I know what it was called. It was called Final Destinations.
Huh.
They actually, it was weird because they actually kind of used my short film, but the funny thing is that in their Final Destinations anthology, they put The Visitant in that one,
Huh.
and then they put Final Destination Unknown, my 1987 short film, in the other one, in the Terrifying Tales one. Okay, now it's all coming back to me. Geez, this was a few years back, so I'm trying to remember everything here.
It's cool. So next is Cellar Doors, a short film from 1989.
Yeah, Cellar Doors was a short film that I did trying to break the mold of my Hell anthology.
Okay.
But Cellar Doors, I met a fellow when I worked at Walt Disney Studios, and he's still alive. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Pete Renaday.
Okay.
And he did a lot of. He worked for Disney Studios as the script librarian, but he was also in tons of Disney movies. He was an actor, and he did voiceovers at all the Disney parks. So he was like the voice in the old Country Bear Jamboree show of Henry the Bear, and that show still plays at Walt Disney World, I believe.
Okay.
No longer at Disneyland. He did tons of voices at the parks, lots of small little supporting roles in Disney movies in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And so Pete had the script. He had a short story that he wanted to make. And I wanted to make a movie with Pete because I thought he was a really cool guy and I admired him. So he had a script called Cellar Doors.
Okay.
And actually, it wasn't a script again. It was a short story. And I adapted it into a screenplay, expanded on it a little bit, and we shot it. Usually my Super 8 films back in those days took 1 to 2 years to make because I would shoot them on weekends here and there.
Mhm.
We'd scrape some money together. We'd have a shoot. So most of my films, you know, funny thing is, pretty much all of my movies, including my professional 35 millimeter feature, The Ghastly Love of Johnny X, were shot over a period of time where there was a break, you know, and we'd finish it. But anyway, so Cellar Doors was about a 2-year project from beginning until premiere in '89. And Pete was great. And that one, I would say, was more like an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It did not really deal with the supernatural. It was a suspense, kind of a suspense film. It was a 40-minute short film, or short film, featurette, whatever you want to call it. And it was good. You know, the acting in the movie was really, really good. And it dealt with this guy. He was a meter reader. Those guys that used to, I think they still have the guys that go and check your meter. And anyway, so he was he got involved with, you know, the wife of, you know, that of a household that he was reading, and it was a nice little kind of a suspense thriller thing.
Okay.
That's all I'll say about it. Again, another movie you won't really be able to see anywhere. What I want to do is when I have this bigger release of either The Ghastly Love of Johnny X or my next film, I want to put all of these early short films, not all of them, but the good ones, like 3 or 4 of them, as bonus features on a Blu-ray release. So it would be kind of fun for people to see my early work when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So that's in the works. But all those movies have original scores, and they were all scored by a guy, Jerry Danielson, who I'm still friends with. I knew him when I was very young, and Jerry's still composing films. He did all of my movies from 1981 through 1994.
Okay.
And then I got a different guy to compose Johnny X, but 2 guys actually. But so yeah, those early scores are a lot of fun, and the movies are pretty nifty. Looking at a young filmmaker's work.
So next is your first feature, I believe, is That Little Monster from 1994.
Yeah, and calling it a feature is really not really fair, to be honest. It really wasn't a feature. It was, the movie itself is not even an hour long. It's 56 minutes, I think.
Okay.
And I call it a featurette. But the one thing that movie had, or has, that none of the other movies before it has, is that it was shot on a higher film format. It was shot on 16 millimeter.
Okay.
And all the other movies I made were Super 8, which was at the time considered an amateur, but a lot of young filmmakers started that way. I mean, Steven Spielberg and anybody that wanted to make movies was working on 8 millimeter or Super 8, which came along a little bit later. Mm-hmm. But so That Little Monster was a film that I was originally wrote that screenplay because I was at that time trying to be a director, as I still am. And I wrote it for a TV show, and I submitted it to a show called Monsters. I don't know if you remember
1985 Monsters.
There was a show called Monsters back in the 80s. Yeah,
I own the complete set.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll never forget going to the set of Monsters with my short screenplay in hand and visiting when they were shooting an episode in Hollywood, and as a young filmmaker. And I had a connection that, I used to make a lot of phone calls. Back in those days, we didn't have the internet, but I would get phone numbers of movie executives, and I would make calls and say, hey, I'm a young filmmaker. I have this script. I even remember once calling George Romero. I don't know how I got his phone number, but I kid you not, I got his number and I called George Romero, and I'll be doggone if he didn't answer the phone and take the time to talk to me.
Oh.
He was a super guy. I mean, that was around the time when I was making Final Destination Unknown when I called George Romero. That would have been in the mid to late 80s. Probably the mid 80s. And anyway, so George Romero was very kind, and he gave me advice and stuff. And I kept his number in my Rolodex all these years. I don't know. Obviously, you can't reach George these days, but
no.
But so to get back to the story, so I called this producer of Tales from the Dark Side. I think his name was Dave Allen.
Okay.
He was interested. He was like a British guy. Anyway, he liked what I had done, and he was thinking of using me on the show Monsters that he was going to start producing.
Okay.
And so I was in the pipeline. But tragically, Dave Allen died.
Oh.
I don't remember what happened, if he had a heart attack or what, but, this was years and years ago. But so he died, and I took the script to the producer, Anthony Santa Croce.
Okay.
And he produced the show Monsters. He was one of the producers. You might have seen his name on the credits.
Yeah.
And so I went over there to Hollywood and showed him I even brought my film, Final Destination Unknown, and I played it for him in his office. I remember putting it in a VHS machine and playing the tape for him so he could see my work. And it was a nice little visit. And then I gave him the script. And I waited to hear from them. And they basically said, well, no, that's a pass. We're not interested. And I had specifically written that script for Monsters. And I was so bummed. I thought, wow, I was so close to getting my first real directing job, you know? And so I just said, well, what do I do in the face of defeat? Well, I make the movie anyway. So what I did was instead of making it as a cheesy little episodic TV show, I once again expanded it. And I decided to go artistic with it, something that Monsters never would have let me do. I shot it on black and white plus X film stock on 16 millimeter. I think Monsters might have been shot on 16 millimeter as well. I'm not sure, but anyway, I shot my film on black and white, and then at that time I was kind of going through my David Lynch phase, you know. So I was really into David Lynch stuff. So you definitely, if you ever see That Little Monster, and it has been released by two companies, originally on VHS from a company called Sinister Cinema, and then a company called Elite Entertainment, which specialized in horror films. They did a very nice DVD release of it, which is still on eBay. If you type in That Little Monster DVD, you'll see tons of them out there. People are still selling them, you know. But anyway, so I did the movie, and it was a little self-indulgent, and it was really about it was a 30-minute. I wrote it as a 25-minute, episode that I expanded into a 56-minute movie. So again, it's very kind of padded and needs to be cut down a bit. But it's very moody. It's a mood piece, and I was really in my artistic mode. And we had a little Steadicam that my friend built, and we used it in the film. And the lighting was really, really good. And the score by Jerry, who had done all my other short films, was really, really good. And one of the cool things about That Little Monster was one of my childhood dreams came true with that film, and I got to work with Bob Hope.
Nice.
And I've been a huge fan of Bob Hope. When I was a kid in the 70s, I made short films about Bob Hope, and he knew about me. And finally, I said, he's getting really old. I mean, am I ever going to get to work with Bob Hope? I mean, it seems like a possibility. Well, I had collected memorabilia from Bob. I collected costumes that he wore in some of his movies in the 40s and 50s. And I brought them. I called on the phone and I said, "Would Mr. Hope do a cam?" And they said, "No, Mr. Hope doesn't do that anymore. He, sorry." And I said, never one to be, discouraged. I took all of this movie memorabilia that I had, and I made an appointment to go see his daughter, Linda Hope, at the office in North Hollywood, in Toluca Lake, I think it was. And I brought all of this into her office, and I set it down on the table, and I said, I realized that I heard that you're building a Bob Hope museum, and you're looking for stuff. I said, I would love to donate, to give you all of this stuff here. All of these costumes from some of Bob's movies. And they were like, wow, really? This is amazing. You're kidding. And I said, and they knew that I was making a movie and that I wanted Bob to do a camera. And they said, well, what can we do for you? And I said, well, it would just be so wonderful if Mr. Hope would do a few lines in my little movie that I'm making. And they said, I think we could work that out. So that is exactly how I got Bob Hope, the legendary Bob Hope, to do a very brief cameo in my film. Over the end credits of That Little Monster, you see him telling a few jokes. And, it was only a few jokes, but you know what? Giving that memorabilia for me was worth having him in my movie. And actually saying my name, he says, this is Bob Hope for That Little Monster. And then he says, regardless of what you heard, it wasn't the Paul Bunnell story. So, just stuff like that. It was so fun to have Bob in my movie. But anyway, that was a really fun movie, and that movie did for me was got me a little. It got me popular at some conventions because I put Reggie Bannister in the film,
Okay.
and Reggie was in Phantasm. And you remember Forrest J. Ackerman, right?
Correct.
Creator of Famous Monsters of Filmland and all of that. Well, I got Forey to do the opening. Originally, I was really ambitious and I wanted Vincent Price, but of course, Vincent Price,
Yeah.
was he even alive? I think Vincent Price had just died.
Yeah.
And I was asking Angus Scrimm, that's it. I was asking Angus Scrimm, the tall man. And Angus wouldn't do it because he said it wasn't SAG, a Screen Actors Guild thing, and he couldn't do it. But he said, you know who you should call? You should call Forey Ackerman. He's the poor man's Vincent Price. And I said, that's a great idea. So I did, and Forey did it, and it was fun to have him do the opening of the movie, recreation of Edward Van Sloan's opening speech from Frankenstein. The story you're about to see might thrill you. It may shock you. It may even horrify you. And so on and so forth. And then we put our little slant on it. Absolutely no babies were injured or placed at risk during the making of this picture. And we shot it just like Edward Van Sloan in Frankenstein. We tried to copy the lighting. We put Forey in front of the same type of curtain. It was so cool to have Forey Ackerman do that. So having Forey in it and having Reggie Bannister in it, who at the time I met him when he was doing Phantasm 2, having these guys in the movie got me a little recognition for that film. If they hadn't been in the movie and the Bob Hope uncredited cameo, I wasn't allowed to advertise Bob Hope, but he was in it too. If they hadn't been in that movie would have been kind of never released or nobody would have seen it. But because I had a few names, I was able to get little bookings at conventions. I would go with Reggie and, we were selling the tapes and I would sign things and, it was really fun. And a lot of the old horror magazines wrote up about it. I think Famous Monsters, Filmland actually mentioned it once. And a magazine called Cult Movies did a whole piece on it. But one of my favorite pieces was in a magazine called Monster Scene, which is no longer around. But who did I get to write this great piece on that little monster but Angus Scrimm himself?
Nice.
And so I didn't get Angus in the movie, but I actually got him to do a nice piece on that little monster, and he gave it a glowing review and all of that sort of thing. And I have this thing framed, and he signed it to me, which was cool. But just having Angus do it. I don't know if you realize this, but if you knew this, but Angus Scrimm, whose real name was Rory Guy, used to do liner notes for Capitol Records, and he wrote the original liner notes for Meet the Beatles. He's a Grammy award-winning liner note writer. I didn't even know you could get a Grammy for writing liner notes, but for records. But back in the day, he did that. And at the time, he was writing for more of the upper crust, the classical records and this kind of thing. And they said, should we put your name on it? Oh, can you help us with this Beatles thing, for their first American release? And he's like, sure, I'll write the blurb, but don't put my name on it. Because it's rock and roll, I don't want to be affiliated. I guess he was kind of regretful in later years, but it's true, though, that he actually wrote the liner notes on the Meet the Beatles record. So a little horror connection for you Beatles fans out there.
Nice.
The tall man wrote the liner notes.
Alrighty, so now we'll get down to the main event, the main film that you are well known for, the Ghastly Love of Johnny X. How did you?
Now that's one nobody's ever heard of. I don't know why you want to talk about that thing.
Well, if nobody's ever heard of it before, they will now. So why don't you tell me how it came about?
Yeah, no, I would say, what would you like to know about it?
Well, how did you? Well, first, how did you come up with the idea for it?
Well, the Ghastly Love of Johnny X Originally, again, going back to the beginning of this whole podcast where I was telling you how I wanted to be a director ever since I was a kid. And I've always been trying to find ways, to talk to people, to get an opportunity for myself. And, one thing after another, somebody would die or, like in the case of Monsters or, just a lot of no's, a lot of doors slammed in my face. So with Johnny X, okay, I thought to myself, well, I did that little monster and that was shot on 16 millimeter and it was a short film, short-ish, a feature, featurette. But nobody can really, what can I really do with that film? I mean, not a lot. And I knew that I had to stop making short films. And I knew that I had to make a feature. And not just any feature, but a professional theatrical grade motion picture that could be shown in theaters on what was at the time the current standard for showing movies, which was 35 millimeter film. You have to think about this now. When I started making The Ghastly Love of Johnny X, digital was around in theatrical exhibition, but digital was barely scratching the surface. Oh, they had been talking about it for years, like, oh, in the future, there's going to be no more film in theaters. It's all going to be digital. And I never liked that. That always sounded like a terrible thing to me, and a lot of people, but they had been predicting it 20 years before it had actually happened. And, another year would pass and another year, and well, the quality just wasn't good enough. But eventually digital did come around, and this is how we see our movies in theaters today, right? It's all DCP. That stands for Digital Cinema Package. And it is how the standard is a 2K DCP. But I know I'm jumping around a little bit. So let me get back to the origins of Johnny X. I knew I had to make a picture that was professional, and because I wasn't getting any opportunities from anybody, I had to create the opportunity for myself. So I thought, well, I'll do what I've always done. I will come up with a cool story. I'll come up with a feature-length script with different friends of mine, different writers, and we hammered away at this thing, and I finally came up with a concept that I liked. And there was a film producer who was a friend of mine. I used to get invited to his house. He would have these like dinner parties and things back in, the late 90s, probably.
Okay.
And his name is Bruce Cohen Curtis, and Bruce produced probably one of his best-known films that he produced was Dreamscape. Do you remember that movie in the 80s?
That movie that had Quinn, the dude.
Well, anyway, Dreamscape. It had Dennis Quaid, right?
Quaid. There we go. Quaid.
Yeah, Dennis Quaid. Anyway, he also did some low-budget films back in the day. He did another one called Roller Boogie. That's kind of a cult film. That has Linda Blair in it. Anyway, so Bruce, back in the late 90s, was still producing movies, and I became friends with this guy, and I'm like, wow, here's a chance to, once again, hopefully, maybe he'll let me direct one of his projects, and so I kept suggesting titles to him, and I said, well, how about Teenagers from Outer Space? They made it in the 50s, but what if I did like a reworking of it? And he stopped and he thought, Teenagers from Outer Space. That almost sounds commercial. And I'm like, okay, because I had this idea about this 1950s gang of so-called teenagers.
Okay.
I mean, back in, from outer space.
Okay.
In the 50s, the teenagers like in the Blob were always 27 years old, That was Steve McQueen in the Blob. But anyhow, he ultimately passed on the idea of letting me direct it, and he just thought, well, no, that's not going to... Bruce was like, I think he was the nephew of Harry Cohen, who was the founder of Columbia Pictures. Anyway, Bruce is still around. I just haven't seen him in many, many years. I'm sure he's long since retired. Anyway, so I started writing this thing, and I told him, another year would pass. And it's like, well, geez, I made that little monster in the 90s. It's almost the 2000s, then it became the 2000s.
Yeah.
I finally said to my friends, look, enough is enough. I've got the script pretty much where I want it. Let's just go out and start shooting some test shots for this film. I want to know what it's like to shoot 35 millimeter, because 35 millimeter is the only way I'm going to get noticed in this industry, because that could play in a movie theater. Okay, so I got the camera one day. A friend of mine, got me the camera because he worked at the camera place. And another friend of mine who did time-lapse had said, we're going to go out in the middle of the desert and we're going to shoot time-lapse photography. And I want it to be like an Ansel Adams, painting or whatever, like a photograph, but a moving image. So we shot this desert stuff, and you see it in the beginning of the movie. And that was actually shot way back in 2002.
Okay.
And it looked great. We had 60 seconds in the can, of footage. It's like, yeah, I'm making my feature. Well, anyway, another year passed, and I got the script better. And then my wife and I at the time, we decided, well, let's make this movie. She was a costumer who wanted to be a designer. Okay. And I was a filmmaker who wanted to be a director, who had made a lot of movies, and I hadn't made one since That Little Monster. So we borrowed some money against our house, and we started shooting our film in 2004. I cast the movie, I got everybody together, and the film was never originally written as a musical, but what happened was I wrote this. I decided to have one musical number in the movie that would be really like come out of the blue, and you wouldn't expect it, and it would be really long and elaborate. Okay. And that's the musical number that's in the diner scene. Okay. And we love that so much, and really that's too long of a music. I look at it now, and that should be highly trimmed. It doesn't quite fit. People are going, oh, is this, Moulin Rouge or what? I mean, big fan of musicals, I'll be honest with you. I really am not. Some musicals I love, like West Side Story, but on average, I'll tell you, current musicals, I just can't get into them. I went and saw this, The Greatest Showman. I couldn't stand that movie. And, they're always about topics that I love, but then they ruin it and they try to make it like Chicago. I hated Chicago. So, I don't know, maybe I'm guilty of making the kind of movie that I despise. I don't know. But so I wasn't trying to make that kind of movie. I was trying to make the musical numbers more like West Side Story, more like Broadway showy, not like contemporary musical numbers that they put into movies today like The Greatest Showman, but trying to do the old-fashioned 1960s, Broadway-style musical numbers, in film. Anyway, I don't know if I accomplished that, but that's what I was going for.
How did you go about with your casting?
With the casting?
Yeah.
Well, I knew I remembered what happened with That Little Monster, that I got a little bit of exposure for only putting, two people in there that were not like huge names or anything, but I had Reggie Bannister and all the Phantasm fans and Forey Ackerman. And I thought, well, that opened some doors and got me some publicity. So why don't I try to find some more of those kind of people and get them in the movie? Okay. And when I put these kind of people in my movie, I don't do stunt casting. I do real casting. I want to give these guys great roles that they can do that make them shine. I'm not interested in a little cameo where where Jack Benny, drives up in his car and he goes, well, he drives off like in Mad, 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 Mad World, which is one of my favorite movies, by the way. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? I want to give them good roles. So I used to frequent these film festivals and things, and I met Kevin McCarthy, for starters, over in Hollywood at the Cinecon Film Festival. Okay. And Kevin, of course, legendarily known for being in Invasion of the Body Snatchers and 100 other movies of general interest. I mean, he was great. And at that time, he was pretty old. And I said, Mr. McCarthy, are you still working? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I have a movie I'm doing. I would, and we're going to do it with the Screen Actors Guild. See, that's something I knew I had to fix. with That Little Monster. That's why Angus Scrimm turned me down. If I had been working with SAG, I could have gotten Angus Scrimm in That Little Monster. So I was on board with SAG, okay? So I knew that I can get any actor now. I can get any celebrity or anybody I wanted that would say yes. So I got Kevin McCarthy. At first he was interested, and then he said no. Then he said yes, then he said no. Then he finally said yes again. Why did you say yes? And he goes, well, I didn't want to disappoint your wife. He kept making excuses like, well, I'm doing a movie with Anthony Hopkins, which he was, a picture called Slipstream that Anthony Hopkins directed. But eventually, I got to know Kevin, and I met with him, and he became comfortable with me, and he said yes, and he took a chance, So we got Kevin on board. And then, of course, I called Reggie Bannister, who I'd become friends with doing the conventions for That Little Monster. And Reggie loved the script. Originally, I asked him if he would play the rock and roll guy, and he goes, well, man, I kind of like the show promoter dude. He's really interesting. And I said, you got it, man. You'd be great. I'd love to have you do it. Reggie, the role of King Clayton. And you know what? He was really good. And I have to say, I think it's one of the best roles Reggie Bannister, certainly in his later career. I think it's one of the best acting jobs he's ever done in a movie, and one of the best roles he's ever had outside of Phantasm and all of that stuff. These other movies he's done, he's had relatively smaller parts. But Johnny X is a really good role for him, and it's in glorious 35 millimeter anamorphic black and white. Reggie's great. So anyway, I got Kevin, I got Reggie. I needed a Johnny X, and a friend of mine said, why don't you look at this guy, Will Keenan? I said, who's that? Well, Will Keenan was in a movie called Tromeo and Juliet. Well, I had heard of that movie, but I'd never seen it. And I knew in my mind I wanted a guy with dark hair, like black hair, that was pale, that had some tattoos. I didn't know who I was going to get, but this is who I pictured in my head, how Johnny X would look. And I looked at some of Tromeo and Juliet, and I'm like, oh, boy, this is, that's different, But this friend of mine knew Will Keenan, so he got me hooked up with him. So I met with Will Keenan, and we talked about the movie. Man, this guy looks like this guy could be the character, And he had a little cult following, and I thought, well, that's good. He's got a cult following with his Tromeo thing and all of that stuff. But he didn't want to smoke in the movie. The character of Johnny X originally smoked a lot, like they would in the 50s. And the funny thing is that Will Keenan in real life smokes. Or he did then. I don't know, he probably still does. But anyway, so he smoked cigarettes. You got to pay me extra if you want me to smoke on screen, because I really don't want to do it. I said, well, why? He said, well, because I don't want to put that negative thing out there for kids. Okay. He said that he'd wished that he hadn't started and all of that. And I said, okay, fair enough. So why don't we, and I was too cheap to pay him the extra money to smoke. So we just gave him black licorice sticks. And that was his thing in the movie, So whenever he picks up a licorice stick, a couple of times, that's because he didn't want to be smoking a cigarette. So now I got Will Keenan in the movie, and we start shooting with those three basic names back in 2004. Okay, and we shot for 7 days in 2004 with all those people. And then we ran out of money. My wife and I were like, wow, where did the money go? We've already spent $60,000 here, and then another 30,000, and it's just adding up. And I'm like, I thought we could make this whole movie for like 300 grand or even 100 grand. I didn't think it was going to come to this. And we were finally shooting, we shot all together about 10 days, 10 or 12 days in 2004, spread out over a few months. One of them was all clumped together in June from all the diner stuff. And then another day was Kevin McCarthy, and another 2 days, and then another 2 days was at the drive-in. Now, when we got to the drive-in at the end of the year, we got out of money, and we had all of this, planned out. It was way far away from where we were based, and I had to put everybody up in a hotel. And the first day was a beautiful sunny day. And then the second day it started to snow.
Oh.
And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. The rains came in and we couldn't match anything from what we had shot the day before. And we had to stop, basically. I had to stop, and that's where the movie stopped until 6 years later. What did we do? The very first thing, we went back and picked up exactly where we left off, back at the same drive-in, 6 years later. And the cast was back, and Deanna as Bliss and Les as Chip. They look the same. There's a scene in the movie where they're sitting in the car talking. That was shot in 2004. And they get out of the car, and they're walking, and that is 2010. 6 years later, and you would never, ever know that there's a 6-year jump in time on that single cut there. Isn't that amazing? I don't know. The actors look great. Either the black and white helped or something, but what happened in that 6-year gap was I was trying to get the money to finish the movie. And the actors had lost faith in me. Everybody had lost faith in me. They were all saying, Paul, make a teaser, make a trailer out of it. I said, I'm not making a trailer. I'm making a movie. Color, use the black and white footage, finish it on digital. I'm like, absolutely not. Everybody was throwing out ideas of how I thought I could salvage this thing. And I just said, no, it's got to be finished the way it was started, and I was about ready to give up 6 years later when a friend of mine came along and said, Paul, I just came into a bunch of money. I would like to help you finish your movie. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. Really? And he gave me, I knew it was real when he gave me a check. And he handed me his check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I knew, boy, we're going to do this thing. Oh, my goodness. And I was excited to get the check, but I was really kind of like, oh, geez, now I got to do the work. This really is going to happen, So I started calling everybody back. And they thought, no, Paul, come on, this isn't really happening, is it? And I was like, no, this time we got the check. We had some false, starts during that 6 years. We had one guy that swore he was going to invest, and then he ended up going to prison for lying to a grand jury. He was conning me. And I'll tell you, Dave, all of the trials and tribulations of trying to get the money to finish the movie and me just hanging in there and never giving up, that's the real story of Johnny X. Not the movie, which came out okay, I guess. There's, always issues with things, but people seem to like it. But the real story about this movie is how difficult it was to get it made and to get it finished, and everything, all of the obstacles that were thrown in our path during the years of trying to put this film together. Now, that is not a way to make a movie, but we made it. And, when we were working, we were on a schedule. I wasn't just here and there. We were on a very strict, tight schedule. I couldn't always get everything I wanted to get, but I was very well prepared, and I had backup plans. And, surprisingly, I think the entire movie, 6 years in 2002 and 4 and 2010, when we finished shooting, I think there were a little over 30 days of shooting altogether, maybe days or not quite 35, anyway, somewhere in that ballpark. And, that's a movie that could have been shot, obviously, in a month if I had all of the money when it was. So I guess I kind of went into it just blindly, like jumping off a cliff and hoping that before I hit the bottom, I was going to invent, be able to stitch together a parachute. It's just one of those things where I just blindly went in and said, I'm going to make this movie. And I started making the movie, and before you know it, we ran out of money, and then we had to stop and start. Anyhow, that's the story of The Ghastly Love of Johnny X. Okay. And to my thrill, of course, if I had gone back now, I have an edited version that I trimmed about 15 minutes out just for myself. Okay. They played it in Australia on Australia television, but that's the only country that's ever seen the edited version. And, you know, some of the big fans of Johnny X don't like the stuff that I cut out, but it certainly helps the movie move along a little bit better. But that's not to say it needs, you know, necessarily every movie could be trimmed down. But,
Well, yeah.
but you know, so here I had a 35 millimeter feature that I started making when 35 was the way to go. And by the time I finished the doggone thing, the very film stock that I was shooting on had become discontinued.
Oh.
I got the very last of it just in the nick of time. If it had taken any longer, I would not have gotten that same film stock. I would have had to shoot on a different stock. And all the theaters were playing digital by that point. You know, in 2010, 2011 and 12, I was doing about a year of post-production, music scoring and special effects and sound. That took about a year. And then we got the movie ready, and I had a 35 millimeter print in my hand, and I said, here it is. And the first people to see it, I took it to Fox Searchlight, and I sent a 35 millimeter print over to Fox Searchlight. I thought, well, this is great. You know, I've got the president of Fox Searchlight looking at my movie. Well, they passed on it, of course. And I never got the big distribution that I was hoping for the film. But eventually a little company called Strand Releasing picked it up for all the North American, you know, DVD. And they never put a Blu-ray out, which I'm, you know, disappointed in. But that just makes people's appetites a little more wet, because eventually we're going to do that Blu-ray. And I've been working with some, you know, I've been talking to people. Like there's a company called Arrow Video in the UK.
Yeah, I actually helped out Arrow Video a little bit when they were kickstarting their Mythica. So
when they were starting what?
When they were kickstarting Mythica, I put some money towards their campaigns when they were doing the because Kevin Sorbo was actually looking for funds on Kickstarter.
Fantastic!
$20 here and there to pick up some of the films.
Well, Arrow Video is a company that I've been entertaining. You know, that I've been basically what do you call it? Sort of schmoozing with.
Okay.
And there's a guy over there that's hasn't looked at the film yet, but they're highly interested. And you never know; it can go either way. It can be yes or it could be no.
Yeah.
But I am trying to make this deal with Arrow and hopefully keep my fingers crossed. I don't want to jinx it by speaking about it publicly, but whatever it is, it is. But that would be if that does come to pass, we would have a Blu-ray, a UK international release, and a Blu-ray release, as long as they deal with Strand Releasing that still has the digital rights here in America and North America. So anyway, so we're hoping for that. You know, it's funny because the movie, I when I did the deal with Strand Releasing, I held on to my theatrical rights because they didn't really want to do anything with it. And I thought, well, can I have the theatrical? They said, sure, you hold on to those. So I've been able to book it, you know, during Halloween and different times of the year. And there was a college recently that had me come down to the University of Southern Indiana, invited me to come down and speak about the film to their film class.
Okay.
And we played it. Normally we play it on a DCP, but occasionally it gets screened on 35 millimeter, which is why I have those beautiful prints, which one copy resides at the Library of Congress, and one copy, not one copy, but the masters, the negatives reside at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.
Nice.
My movie is protected in a sense that if something were to happen to me, well, the movie is preserved there. You know, I mean, it's in the system so that, you know, they can discover it years from now and go, what is this weird little independent film from the 2010s? I mean, this is interesting, you know. So somebody made this movie on film, and it was an independent movie. So anyhow, but so many great news stories have come out, you know, just by fluke. We were the lowest grossing film of 2012. So somebody started publicizing that, and one thing led to another. And CBS Sunday Morning did a whole big story about me the next year.
Okay.
And they aired it during their Oscar show on Oscar Sunday. And so that was great. Bill Geist did this show with me. They came from New York to interview me here in Hollywood. And it was really, really great. And I've done a lot of things, you know, live TV show appearances, and NBC Nightly News did a story about it being the last movie shot on Plus X, and We've been featured in newspapers and magazines and the American Cinematographer magazine. So anyway, I've been very thrilled by the ongoing publicity, and it seems to have been woven into people's minds. But the one thing that we need is we need a cable release. It needs to be shown on TV. And once it's shown on TV, it was on Netflix, for 1 year.
Huh.
And when it was on Netflix, it got a lot of people. It was on a lot of people's radar, and they were able to see it.
Okay.
And that really helped a lot. But Netflix took it off after a year. So I'm hoping my goals are this. For this movie, I would love for it to get a release, of course, overseas in the UK and on Blu-ray. And ultimately, the Criterion Collection. Now, if you're going to reach for something or shoot for the moon, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a movie the Criterion Collection could really do some really great stuff with. Because if you see this movie in HD, the cinematography, with all the film's shortcomings, it's not a perfect movie. Like I said, nothing is. But the cinematography truly is gorgeous and needs to be seen in HD.
Yeah.
And because it's the last film shot on Plus X film stock, which was basically a black and white negative that Kodak manufactured that was a very fine grain. And it had a low ASA. In other words, you needed a lot of light to shoot it. And we were using scope lenses, anamorphic lenses. So we really needed to make sure the lighting was good. And it came out beautifully. I had all the lighting we needed. And, oh boy, that set was so hot from all the lights because you really needed a lot to get the exposure, to make the exposure right.
Okay.
Now, they still manufacture a grainier stock. I think the Kodak still puts out the Tri-X, or what they call double X in 35 millimeter, but it's grainy. It's not as good looking as the Plus X. So,
well,
but that's the story of The Ghastly Love of Johnny X, David. It's available if anybody wants to see it right now.
Okay.
You can get it on DVD. Amazon, of course, sells it.
Is it streaming?
We have a beautiful. It is streaming. Amazon, you can get it through Amazon. You could stream it on iTunes. You could stream it on a platform called Vudu. Do you know Vudu?
Yeah, I know of Vudu.
Yeah, it's on that one.
Okay.
You could stream it. Those are the main ones I know of. I think YouTube has it. Not for free, but you could buy it and then stream it through there. And you can see the movie on HD if you get it through Vudu or Amazon. I think you can actually download an HD copy.
Okay.
I always see it on eBay. If you just type in The Ghastly Love of Johnny X, there's always somebody selling the DVDs. Or what else? Maybe you could see it at a theater near you. If anybody out there in their hometown has an art house theater that shows random reissues and that kind of thing, let me know, because I'll try to bring it there. I did 4 different states. This last year, we took it to a theater in Washington, Vancouver, Washington.
Okay.
It showed at the University of Southern Indiana in Evansville. It showed in Howell, Michigan. And it played in Barberton, Ohio at a theater. So those are all bookings that the theaters that requested the movie.
Okay.
And a few of those I actually went to. I often will bring DVDs to sell if people want it, and I'll sign them. And we even have a limited edition soundtrack CD that Kritzerland put out.
Oh.
And so I still have a few of those. Anyway, there's always stuff out there for the movie and ways to see it.
Awesome.
Or, just call me. I've got a copy. So.
I thank you for coming on. There were actually a few suggestions that I was gonna tell you about. Which, like I said,
yeah.
Normally I podcast with a few young ladies who work with Deadgar's Dark Coffin Classics from Kenosha.
Right.
And Celeste Parker, she works with Deadgar on the show. Well, I told her about you, and I will have her contact you. They have some local channel variety thing that they can maybe see if you'd like to be interested in being on some kind of level. Level.
The one thing for that, you mean Johnny X being on their channel?
Correct.
Well, the only problem with that is that the rights for any digital broadcasting of any kind are owned by Strand Releasing. So I couldn't really do that. Although, That Little Monster is available if they want something like that.
Okay.
But we can run clips of Johnny X and talk about it and promote it or whatever. But until their distribution rights expire, my hands are tied there. But if they wanted to organize like a public screening somewhere, which I guess they don't do that, but if they did, of course, that is all owned by me, and I control all of the theatrical and have to go through Strand. Strand will charge money, so they will charge money. They have a saying, you have to pay to play. So
okay.
So but that's just because I made the movie doesn't mean that I own all the rights. But I own the movie. But these digital rights are all tied up right now by a distributor. So.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you about a few other options that you go down the road possibly.
That would be fantastic.
There's a guy who puts together like a really nice VHS type ordeal that does stuff in the UK, and he does his own artwork and whatnot. I mean, if anything down the road that you want, if he likes it, what he does is he gets you make money from it, and he makes like 50 of these things. He does underground gore elector. He puts them in this like cool VHS thing. And
so that's cool. So it's like a retro. So he releases these movies on a retro format.
Correct.
And people are buying them. Well, no, that's fantastic, because even though that's not really how I would like my UK premiere to be, I could certainly authorize a limited edition. All of the foreign rights for the movie are 100% available right now. If anybody out there in any other territory, Australia, where would like to make a movie release, it is here. It is available. Just contact my people, whoever they are.
I can hook you up with this guy. The other thing I was going to tell you about is there's a guy out there who does stuff on Roku, and I know you have nothing to do with the digital rights here in America, but he's kind of getting somewhat well known. He's actually the guy behind the Dahmer the Dahmer comic book from back in the day, unfortunately, but. He runs American Horrors, which is a Roku. I figure Celeste, once she gets in contact with you, she can tell you a little bit more about that. So
well, that's fantastic. I appreciate all of your all the help here, and all of the advice, and all the contacts. And if there's anything I could do for you, I'll be happy to do it.
Most definitely. Well, thank you for coming on and talking with me. I'm thankful for you being able to do this, and thankful for digital technology these days. So
absolutely. So you've seen the movie, of course, and you've reviewed it and everything on your website, Movies Galore.
I really enjoyed it. I reviewed it probably about a year ago, and I happened to. See. I've been writing reviews for the last 3 years now.
Right.
I started out as a very small Stephen King movie club, and then I branched out to more movies, and I started getting to know more independent filmmakers and whatnot. And then over time, I've become a producer of my own making. Right now, the biggest thing that I helped produce will be coming out in 2018. It's called Russell Massacre with Brad Twigg.
Wow.
He helped me get some of my DVD collections for really cheap, so I decided to return the favor and help him out on his film. He was struggling for a little bit, so.
That's fantastic.
But other than that, I'm right now working with a short filmmaker from South Carolina myself, and we don't know what project he's making, but he assures me that it's going to be a good one. And all I really want to do was kickstart his career, and he's very young. But he did a short film called Hey Eternus, and you might actually like it.
I'd love to see it.
It's on black and white. You can find it on YouTube.
Oh, fantastic. Send me a link for that, won't you?
Yeah, I will definitely. And I liked it so much that I wanted to kickstart his career. So
that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that.
So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I watch movies from time to time and write them up. So I thank you for coming on. And hopefully you can make your film that you want to make.
Yes, I do have a movie that I have just finally, after 5 years of trying to get it right, I finally completed the screenplay for a movie called Rocket Girl.
Okay.
And I'm really excited about this project. It's got my stamp on it, but it's very interesting. It's fun. It's got retro stuff in there. It's 1960s and present day stuff, but it is just a fantastic little adventure film. Really more of a relationship thing.
Okay.
Couple, but it's something that I'm dying to get made. So
awesome.
It will happen. If I can get the Ghastly Love of Johnny X made, I can get Rocket Girl made. I'm pretty confident.
Well, I'm pretty confident in you too, sir. I think you have a lot more in store for the public to see of the things that you want to portray onto your film. So I appreciate your time, and hopefully you have a good evening, and hopefully you enjoyed your time here on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Most definitely.
Happy New Year to you and everybody listening.
You too.